Welcome to Goldfish on Games and Cover Disc Face Off, where for January of 1994 we're having a right rumble. As we aren't having the regular 3 magazines, no. It's not just Amiga Power, Amiga Format and Amiga Action, we are also including the One For Amiga and CU Amiga, so this is going to be a big fight. Let's start with the One For Amiga. That included a very festive cover for its January edition, and included 2 discs and a limited edition game, PD and a demo. With Galactic Xmas Remix coming at us first. We've seen Galactic in a previous issue, and what I didn't realise at the time was it never got released. So the One stepped up, and with a touch of paint we get this full version with an Xmas twist. Santa is having a bad dream and needs to collect all his playing cards, I guess to give out as presents, before he wants to wake up. This means that we have to hit all the baddies in the level, and once they're taken care of, we can move on. But if you thought it was that simple, then you've not seen this game before, as you have 2 health meters, one of which will be active, and you can refill them by collecting the playing cards that will fall from the baddies when they die, as your health will slowly deplete as you play, but also when you get hit, so collecting those cards is required to keep going. But you can switch between your 2 health bars by bashing into the invincible baddie that will be roaming around as well. It's a bit of a weird title, and the Santa version just adds to it. It can feel like quite a bit to take in all at once, and I think that's what might have stopped this from becoming an arcade-style classic, even if it is a bit of a fancy game. Our first demo of the episode is for Zool 2, and the product placement is here in the demo as well. Now I'm a big fan of Zool 2, to the extent that I know this first level very well. To the extent that I can point out that there's a missing room that should be off the side here, that's normally hidden. The rest of the level is the same, with the same goal as well, with you having to collect 99% of the items and then make it to the exit. Yeah, this is very much a Euro platformer, with a heavy collect 'em up element. But it does show quite a few improvements over the original game. Zool can now climb walls without having to jump off, and he can even do a spinning somersault. And if you collect it, then there's a charge shot as well. But weirdly for the demo, there's no option as playing as zoos, so you can't even go and explore those branching paths, or do any more than this single level. Now I would have been sold on this game anyway, but I think they could have put a little bit more effort into this one. And lastly for the One is the shareware game Beetle. In the introduction text, it mentions that you're having to climb a wall, and you have a time limit based on the green beetle that you're racing against. And so at this point I had no idea what to expect, but it turns out this is a single screen puzzle platformer, in which you have to collect all the grubs in a level to unlock the teleporter. But there are, or at least there will be, lots of things that will get in your way, as well as lots of things that will help, like jets that will send you flying, or platforms that will fall. One interesting touch is that when you die, the level might flip, so losing a life might make the game a little bit harder, as when you return to it you're going to have to try and play it backwards. It's a tricky little game, and one that I could actually see me putting quite a bit of time into, as I do like these single screen platformers. But even more so when you consider that there's actually a decent level editor included. Now you can't do much with it in the demo, as you can't load or save, but it's possibly one of the more detailed editors that I've seen included with an Amiga game. And there's also a whole host of mini-games that you can play as well. And they even put a bunch of effort into the options, as you can play with music, or have a different track with sound effects, or you can play with a more zoomed in view where it'll actually scroll around, so it's no longer a single screen. I'm not sure there's much more you could want out of a shareware title. The second magazine is Amiga Format, that had 2 discs, but just a single demo as well as a full program. And that program in question is Disk Master 2. If you've used Directory Opus, then this might look very familiar. If not, then this is a sort of replacement for the regular Workbench shell. It allows you to browse the file system, move and copy files, as well as start programs, all as you might expect. But it has this twin view that can make it easier to visualize the source and destination folders. But it also has built-in support for viewing images, working with compressed files, looking at text, as well as running scripts. I had this magazine back in the day, but I skipped over this program. But looking back at it, I think I should have given this more time, as it would have been very useful. But these days, Workbench has gotten a lot of those things built in, or you can just go use Directory Opus, which was given away free a few years later. But maybe we should also be taking another look at this, seeing how powerful it seems to be. Its demo is for the classic Beneath a Steel Sky, a point-and-click adventure that gives you this first area to explore and puzzle out. Well, once we get past this initial cutscene. But you won't really know what's going on without the intro. But they didn't have the space for that on that single floppy disk, so they did the next best thing, and they included a version of the comic book with that issue. It wasn't printed in the same fancy paper that we got in the full game, but it was a really cool thing to get back then. And I have to say, I read it and played this demo multiple times. The interface for this game is really simple. It's all mouse driven with one button doing looking and the other one is interact. And you have to say that this is a lovely looking title, even if there isn't too much in the way of music in this version. And playing this led me on to getting the full game, which did suffer from having a huge number of discs. That made it a little bit tricky to play on an Amiga 500 Plus with a single floppy drive. And having to switch all the time between various screens, that wasn't fun. But for this demo, it's not too bad, because we just have that single floppy disk, even if the loading times can be a little long. But once we get our friend Joey up and running, we can then set off a series of events that will lead us down to the lower level. It's not a particularly long demo, once you know what you're doing, but working it all out was so good. The third magazine is Amiga Action, that kept the trend going of having 2 discs, but this time we get 3 demos. The first one being Alien Breed 2. That must have been based on a mostly finished game, as we have a full menu here, including the character select. So if you wanted to play as an alien going after the breed, you can. We get to play the second level of the game, which is a good choice as that first level isn't very good. And what we have to do is go around and try and take out these spinning generators, all while dealing with the xenomorph style aliens that will keep spawning. And that's always been a bit of a sore spot for the Alien Breed games. You get very limited ammo and credits, but unlimited targets. This is basically Alien Breed Special Edition, but with everything turned up a few notches. It looks better, there's far more variety in the baddies, and far more complex levels for you to travel around. And this does mean that the map will come in more handy than ever before. And don't forget about collecting that cash, as you'll then get to use the Intech stations and upgrade your weapons. This is a pretty sizable demo, with 2-player options as well. So this would have been a lot of fun to play back then. So all in all, a great game and a decent demo. We get our second dose of Gremlin as it's time for the Disposable Hero. Another demo that's showing how near complete it was, as we have this full menu with a fancy spinning model. And in game we find a very nice horizontal shooter. Now this is running on the stock Amiga as well, so it's doing some very nice things here, and it runs really smoothly. Now this is the whole first level of the game. And there is a lot to find here, including some mini bosses, as well as baddies that don't seem to be all that bothered with you, as they'll just attack you once and then just walk off the screen. Bye bye. One of the more interesting parts of the game is the upgrade system, as you'll have to find the ship parts as you travel along, and then you can dock in these domes to enter the mechanics. And it's here that you can switch out the parts, but there's two things that will make this special. First, you have to wait for the part to be decrypted. But due to the auto-scrolling nature of the game, this might not happen for a while. So there is actually some tactics in dying and wasting time. The other is that your ship has a limited amount of power, so you can't just fit everything. So you'll have to turn some bits off if you want to turn others on. That is until you unlock some power upgrades. This is an interesting game and a fun demo, but as you can see, I'm not all that great when it comes to shooters. The final demo for Amiga Action is for the Dinosaur Detective Agency, which seems to be at least a semi-custom Xmas demo. Now this is the fun of these magazines coming out near the end of the previous month, so these would have been dropping just around about the time for Christmas, even if it does say it's the January edition. And that's why we get some Christmas music. But once we get past that, we get an intro, where we find out that we are playing as Sherlock Ness. And after that intro, I was surprised to find out that this is a platformer, in which we are armed with a camera. That won't work until we find some flashes, and that is our only real weapon in the game, and it won't even kill the baddies, it just stuns them for a short amount of time. You can take them out by touching them, but that will also eat up one of your own lives, and you only have a limited number of them, even if the game doesn't reset when you lose one. Our dino friend does have a few other abilities, like being able to dig, which can be done on these nice user-friendly highlighted areas. And it's not just a case of digging down, you can go back up again as well. The basic platforming works well enough, even if you do feel a little bit slow. It's a bit like Chuck Rock in that sense. But you can push objects around and ride on minecarts. Now, it's not really pushing the boundaries of platforming, but it does seem like a bit more interesting than I first expected, as the levels seem to be quite large with lots of areas for you to go off and explore, where you might find more lives, or time, or even money. I'm not quite sure if it's needed or if it's just for the points though. So this might be a game we'll have to return to. And with that, it's time to move on to our fourth magazine, which is CU Amiga. And across its 2 discs, there are 2 programs and a single demo. The first one is a biggie, as it's the Shoot 'em Up construction kit. Long-term viewers might remember seeing this one, as I've done a whole video on it. And even shorter-term viewers might have seen 1 or 2 games that were made using this program, as it's a tool that lets you make very basic shoot-em-ups. This includes making graphics for the players and the enemies, as well as the bullets and the backgrounds, and then you can design paths for your baddies to follow, and set how strong they are. What you can't do is have any power-up system, and it's very limited with how many frames of animation everything can have. But people got really creative with it, and they even included a few great examples on the disc. But it's got a really easy to use interface, and you can get going with it pretty quickly, even if it does require using the mouse and the joystick at various points. I'm a big fan of these easy to use game makers, as they are a great introduction to game development. You don't need to code or even script anything. Yes, it's limited, but that means you're just going to have to work around those limitations if you want to make something great. I put so many hours into this back in the day, and I'm not sure if I got my copy from here or if it's from a mate, but all I remember was having a lot of fun. More so than the second tool, which is Font Grabber. This allows you to design your own bitmap fonts on the Amiga. You just draw them in your favourite art package, import them, and then let it know which letter is which. And then once the font is created, you can use it in various programs on the Amiga. It's a neat app, but not one that I would really use. So let's move on to CU Amiga's single demo, which was for Mortal Kombat. Here we get to play as Sonya Blade versus Liu Kang. And it's either you versus the computer, or you can have a second player join in. And all the moves for those two characters are here, but pulling them off might be a little bit more work than other versions, as we are limited to a single fire button. So there is a good bit of pulling in a specific direction and pressing fire, but also having to let the computer decide on what move you want to do. Thankfully, all the special moves are the same, as double tapping a direction and fire seems to work nicely. But unlike other home versions, this one has blood, and it's enabled by default. Although not in the attract mode for some reason. It's not the best looking version of Mortal Kombat you'll ever find, but I think they did a good job seeing that they are targeting the original Amiga hardware, and we get all the sound effects and even music. Which means they had to put in a good bit of effort. So I also had to put in a bit myself to show off a fatality. It was the only one I managed to pull off. I'm sure this demo didn't really change many people's minds on getting the game, as it was so big that everyone wanted it. But I do think it helped show that this was a much better conversion than Street Fighter 2. And let's move on to the final and most packed magazine of the episode. It's Amiga Power, that had 3 discs and 5 demos, as well as a PD game. And to continue with the sort of Xmas but it's not theme, we get Fantastic Dizzy's Christmas Preview. Which isn't really festive at all. I'm not sure why Amiga Power called it that. But what we do get is a very small part of Fantastic Dizzy, complete with some music that sounds, well, a little bit slow and drunk. So maybe that's the Christmas spirit. Dizzy, if you've not played it, or seen Rose Tinted Spectrum's amazing 24-hour Dizzy Marathon, is a game about an egg that has to collect a lot of items to be used in the right place to solve puzzles. But along the way, various creatures will get in the way and try to hurt you if you don't avoid them. This is a very limited demo, as there's just one puzzle for you to solve and a few stars for you to collect. And the last thing that you can do is a mini-game, which is a sliding block one that shows a nice picture of Dizzy and a wizard when you manage to complete it. I feel this demo could and should have been much bigger than this, as this is barely less than 1% of the game. But we're going to continue on with our stylistic whiplash as we're going to check out T2 the arcade game, which is another port by Probe they were really quite busy this month. Now this is the first level of the game, and it looks, from the start, a decent enough port. It's a little annoying that it doesn't have sound effects as well as the music, but that was a common problem on the Amiga, even if the same company managed it for Mortal Kombat. This is a scrolling shooter that would obviously play best with a light gun, but the second best option is the mouse. And you can shoot with the left mouse button and missiles with the right. It's a fun game that has multiple Terminators coming at you from various different directions, some of which you can even blow their heads off. Though weirdly, those ones that come really close take the most bullets to take out. Along the way you will find some upgrades as well as more bullets in these boxes that show up along the bottom of the screen. And then you get all sorts of things to shoot at, from stuff that flies along and others that will fire missiles at you. And then eventually you get the boss. It's a nice demo, and if you enjoyed it, then you definitely would enjoy the full game, as it's pretty much more of the same. Now we follow that with a demo for Globule. Another one that looks fairly complete. It seems by 1994 developers were no longer sending in progress builds or just whatever they happened to have running at the time, and were actually putting a lot more effort in. But it does mean we don't get to see as many games in their earlier state. This is another puzzle platformer style game in which you have to collect all the gems, but the gimmick here is that you can stick to all the surfaces and then send yourself flying. It's a little tricky to start with, but the controls, well, they click after a while, and it is actually quite cool. This isn't a game that I really played before, but it was mentioned when I reviewed Tiny Little Slug, and trying it out now, I can see the similarities. They have given us a few levels to explore, which is good, as the first one wasn't very big. The later ones though, wow, they are huge, and they are full of baddies and spiky things and all sorts that will hurt you. Annoyingly, it doesn't give you any invincibility when you get hurt, so it's possible for it to bounce you from one spike to the next, eating up a lot of your health. But you do have lives on top of that, which is a bit handy. This really is an interesting game, and it's one that I'll have to return to. We continue to wildly jump between genres and styles as we have Dogfight next. Now, as we know, I'm not very good at flight sims, so let's see what we can do in the What If mode, the only one that the demo gives us. And from here we have the choice of free flight or fighting against the computers in one of 3 planes. This is a game that really requires the extra power of the A1200, but you can run it on the A500 if you are feeling a bit brave. The environments feel a little basic compared to some of the flight sims that we've seen, but the basics of flying the plane seem to be fine, and we can switch between a behind the plane view as well as a few others, which does make it a little bit more interesting to look at. It's nice that we have some control over the player versus computer mode, with what fighters that you'll be up against and where people start. This is actually feeling a little bit more arcadey than some of the flight sims that we've seen. But again, it's not one that I'd really play because this really isn't my type of game. But I don't see any reason why this shouldn't be a good title for those that like it. Next, we are checking out the single PD game of this magazine, Cluedo, or as it's known in some regions, Clue. This is a fan recreation of that popular board game and fun film. And it seems to be a single player version as well, as you can set how intelligent the AI is. And they all take their turns moving around the map, which does look a little basic, but should be more than enough for this game. Even if they did try to get a little bit fancy with the graphics for the text, I think it actually made some of them a little harder to read than anything. But I'm gonna have to level with you. I've never actually played the board game. Yes, please leave your gasps and messages in the comments. And so I really don't know how to play this. All I know about it is Professor Green in the study with the candlestick, but I have no idea what that means. So I'm not really going to be the best at giving a quick overview of how good this is. Which means you just get to see me flounder around for a bit, not having a clue of what I'm doing. And our final demo for the episode is Seek and Destroy, a helicopter combat game along the lines of Desert Strike, but this is done in a top-down view that moves a little bit like a SNES Mode 7 game. Or the special stages in Sonic 1. It's a fast game that you'll have to track down and take out multiple targets, both in the air as well as on the ground. And there's a range of weapon systems to use here, from a regular chain gun to missiles and screen-clearing airstrikes. Being top-down does make it a little bit more difficult to avoid some of the enemy attacks. More so those ground-based ones that just quickly fire missiles at you as soon as you're on screen. But thankfully there are fuel and armor pickups that you'll have to land to collect. This does seem to be quite an interesting one. I'm not quite sure it's as playable as Desert Strike, but for this demo you did get a couple of maps, so that's quite cool. And I think this might be one we'll have to come back to in the future. And there we have it, 5 magazines. Now that was a bit of an epic. And because of the amount of content, I'm not going to rank the mags. Instead, I'm going to pick my top 3 items that we got to see today. And then I'll let you argue in the comments which magazine was the best. So I think in third place, I'm going to give it to Beetle. For a shareware game, this had a lot going for it. And to include a level editor and everything, that goes above and beyond. In second, I'm giving it to Beneath the Steel Sky. I played that demo more than any other in this episode, and I still massively enjoy it to this day, even if it did arrive on 11 floppy disks. And in first place, it had to be the Shoot 'em Up construction kit. Yeah, it might have resulted in some very average shooters that we've seen in our time, and it doesn't run as smooth as it should do. But I played around a lot with this back in the day, and it's still fun to do so now. So on top of the good-natured chat about which magazine was the best, you can also let me know if you agree with my top software for the month. And I hope you enjoyed this slightly different format. I should be doing more regular style episodes in the future, but these might come up more and more often as we start to use up the more interesting months. And until next time, I was the Goldfish, that was 5 magazines, and this was Goldfish on Games. Thanks for watching. I've done a number of these magazine showdowns in the past, so you might want to check out some of those if you haven't. Or there's some buttons under the video that YouTube enjoys if you give them a press. But either way, I hope to see you again soon.